Good evening. I'm Michael Kaan, and I'm here this evening partly for being the author of one book, The Water Beetles, which the Walrus awarded a prize to back in May. But in a longer-term sense, I'm here because I wasn't vaporized in 1981, or in 1983, or again in 1984, against all my expectations. I acquired these expectations because of a stream of warnings I was constantly picking up as a boy in the 1980s. The most memorable of these was in church one afternoon when the minister noted that the city of Winnipeg, normally and deservedly the butt of jokes, was also a high-value Soviet nuclear target, thanks to its 2 military bases and adjacent nuclear facility. The Reverend announced this reassuringly, since the city was scheduled to receive the equivalent of 200 Hiroshimas within a space of minutes, and we would all go quickly. 200 Hiroshimas when the day came. When the day came, because it was assumed then it soon would. Most people, of course, have forgotten how dangerous a time the 1980s were. Who would want to dwell on such a terror? We mostly remember it for Back to the Future and the setting of Stranger Things, and that has been our choice. We have also forgotten or don't even know how long we have lived at the brink of apocalypse. There have been many. Now, it largely takes the form of fears about global warming, especially after the last IPCC report, but there are other fears as well. Most of you will know the story of Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet officer who in 1983 disobeyed an order to report a radar image that appeared to be incoming American missiles, but was actually a cloud cluster, thus preventing a full-scale retaliatory nuclear attack by the USSR. Only because of him are we here today. In a different time, a young man wrote in his diary one evening how a few nights earlier he watched in horror as his childhood friend went mad with fear and began to howl like an animal and then bled himself to death in expectation of the coming terror and the end of all he knew. That was a young provincial Lithuanian man in 1804, as he and his fellow villagers awaited the arrival of Napoleon and the destruction and atrocities his armies were known to bring. And centuries further back in Europe, during the great episodes of plague, there were many who resigned themselves to debauchery, magic, and visions, believing they were witnessing the end of all things. If we care to look back into history, as we rarely do, we should think of them with deep empathy. We have always lived at the edge of our destruction, even before we lacked the full technology, whether direct or incidental, to destroy the entire human race. Death is the end of a single life. But apocalypse is the destruction of what we believed would survive us, our culture, our words, and our descendants. We can name a few of its current potential forms, but the historical list is long, continuous, and plausible. Wars, pandemics, natural disasters, the sudden infertility of land and creatures. Contemplating these outcomes isn't something we do well. A very small number of people know enough to grasp some of the risks we face, and the rest of us are left to bicker, play partisan, or, most rationally, ignore the risk. But there's an important question, a moral one, about how we should form our attitudes, because how we face risk matters a lot. After the last IPCC report, a lot of people concerned about global warming were publicly asking what options were really left. Blind optimism isn't helpful, but on the other hand, should I despair isn't a rational question, and we shouldn't try to answer it. Yet many people have been asking that. Now, we are mired in irrational answers and narratives today, and we can all see the effect they're having. Should we strive to make that worse? We are, after all, naturally biased to believe that negative talk is more serious and informed. We also ignore all the past ways we've survived, and not all of it is due to luck. I think it will get much worse, but the technological innovation engineered by a very small number of people will eventually pull us back, but my own guesswork isn't the issue here. But even if I'm right and we're saved again, I feel certain that within a generation, the great terror of global warming will have been forgotten. And should that happen, as I hope it does, what will people in the early 22nd century remember of these times? Twitter and cat videos? Slow computers? Too many highway deaths? If our descendants forget our current moment at the brink, they will not be unique. They will be, as we have always been, inclined to forget. What do we remember now about the human experience of World War II? Brisk newsreel clips and Glenn Miller and V-Day parades, or the epidemic suicides of whole German families in fear of Allied reprisals, cannibalism in Japanese prison camps? What do we remember or even know of the An Lushan rebellion in the 8th century, when over a tenth of the world's population was massacred in a vision of apocalypse? How often do we think on the era before Norman Borlaug, when millions regularly faced starvation from crop failures? And how many remember the words of Yudhisthira, the hero of the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata? He and his 4 brothers were all led to a lake one day, while exiled in the forest. And though they were dying of thirst, the god Dharma, concealed in the water, forbid them from drinking until they could answer his one question. He asked each of the brothers in turn, "What is the greatest mystery?" One by one, the brothers were struck dead as they gave the wrong answer, and their bodies lay at the water's edge. It was only the last one, Yudhisthira, the eldest and wisest, who answered correctly and whose life was spared. When Dharma asked him, "What is the greatest mystery?" Yudhisthira looked into the water, and he replied, "Each day men die, but we live as though we were immortal. This is the greatest mystery." Thank you.